Today, I'm sharing my approach to setting up for a corporate sit-down interview. So if we look at our shots, this is going to be our key side, the side that's away from the camera lens. And typically, you want that side to be brighter than the fill side. So I just placed my key light against the wall here. And same thing, using false color, I can then adjust the intensity of that light until I reach the levels that I want. I actually used a pop-up bounce right above the subject's head to eliminate as much spill from those overhead lights as possible. The next and last thing that I do is also set up a backlight to create an edge brighter around your subject to separate the subject from the background.